Hi, I'm Stanley Bentu from First Wave TV, and this is Nuts and Bolts. In the build-up to the 2023 general elections, which is just around the corner, especially before the party primaries, politicians had been very vocal. But they were not talking about all of the troubles facing Nigerians and how to fix them. No. They were mostly talking about where the next president should come from and which geopolitical zone should produce the next presidential candidate. In the various states, it was no different. Regions, states, and geopolitical zones were merely replaced with senatorial zones and local governments in those conversations. So, what is this obsession we seem to have with the ethnic identity of our leaders? This episode of Nuts and Bolts seeks to answer these questions and show how political leaders exploit this and con their kinsmen into making the road to power easier for themselves and their friends while abandoning their people in a state of perpetual poverty. Today, we are here to debunk one myth that has been floating around in Nigerian politics for far too long. Having the president come from your state does not make your people any better off. In fact, the statistics show that the opposite is the case. The federal government of Nigeria, through the National Bureau of Statistics, recently launched the results of the 2022 Multidimensional Poverty Index Survey. This survey was a collaborative effort between the National Bureau of Statistics and the National Social Safety Nets Coordinating Office, as well as the United Nations Development Programme, the United Nations Children's Fund, and the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. The survey, which sampled over 56,000 households across the 36 states of the Federation and the FCT, was conducted between November 2021 and February 2022 and provides multidimensional poverty estimates at senatorial district levels. The survey reveals that 63% of the people living within Nigeria, that is 133 million people, are living in multidimensional poverty. But what is multidimensional poverty?
Remember back in the day when poverty was just poverty? Now, it turns out that there are different types of poverty. There is extreme poverty, which is also called deep poverty or abject poverty. According to the UN, extreme poverty is when a high percentage of citizens in the country are living below the poverty line, which is $2.29. $2.29 is equivalent to 1,200 naira. So we've been there, done that. Now, according to the latest report, we have taken a step into multi-dimensional poverty. Now, at this stage, the multi-dimensional poverty stage, the majority of the poor are not just suffering for the lack of money. They are suffering multiple disadvantages at the same time, like poor health, lack of clean water, lack of electricity, lack of work, and lack of education, hence making it multi-dimensional. According to the report, 2 out of 3 Nigerians are experiencing multi-dimensional poverty. So if you're keeping track, we have extreme poverty and now multi-dimensional poverty.
Most countries around the world define poverty as a lack of money. However, the poor themselves consider their experience of poverty much more broadly. A person who is poor can suffer multiple disadvantages at the same time. For example, they may have poor health or malnutrition, a lack of clean water or electricity, poor quality of work, or little schooling. Focusing on one factor alone, such as income, is not enough to capture the true reality of poverty. Multidimensional poverty measures can be used to create a more comprehensive picture. They reveal who is poor and how they are poor, the range of different disadvantages that they experience, as well as providing a headline measure of poverty. Multidimensional measures can be broken down to reveal the poverty level in different areas of a country and among different subgroups of people. Now, according to DataFight, census and demographic data are not only falsified in order to receive undeserved numbers of federal and state legislative seats, Those purported numbers are also used to sway election outcomes in the interest of a false majority that decides Nigeria's presidents. And why is all this? Well, the Nigerian president, after all, handles 53% of the country's revenues and chooses the individuals who stash away and share and supervise the country's vast visible and veiled resources. These enormous powers of the central federal government fuel the people's presumption that having a person from their state, region, or ethnicity or religion as the president would fast-track the infrastructural development and economic growth of their people. But the data consistently debunks this myth. In the Nigerian variant of politics, it all comes down to the twins of federal might and federal allocation. When we pad our population figures for the purpose of election victories and larger shares of allocation rather than productivity and economic growth, the consequences are dire. The flawed logic behind the myth is that most populous people determine the person and the path of the federal government, and therefore they would receive the highest returns from the federal government. President Muhammadu Buhari even alluded to this in an interview session shortly before his swearing in as president in 2015.
I hope you have a copy of the election results. Naturally, constituencies, for example, that year gave me 97%, cannot, in all honesty, be treated on some issues with constituencies that gave me 5%. I think this is a political reality.
Well, after nearly 8 years, can we truly say that Katsina State, where the president comes from, or any other state that supported him with 95%, is 95% better off than the others? I doubt it. Here's the thing. The poorest states in the country are the states that have produced the heads of the federal government. And this is not a recent phenomenon. It has been the trend since the end of the Civil War of 1967 to 1970. The startling truth is that the home states of the post-Civil War heads of state in Nigeria are either the poorest of all in the country or the poorest in their respective regions. First of all the states that produced Nigeria's heads of state or presidents since 1967 all have their multidimensional poverty indices below the national average of 25.7% or 0.257. With regards to multidimensional poverty, Sokoto, President Shehu Shagari's home state, is the worst in the Northwest region.
Despite producing more leaders in the nation since independence, the North remains poverty-stricken. The question is, why?
Bayelsa, President Goodluck Jonathan's state, is the worst in the South region.
Nigeria is Africa's top oil producer, and oil is the government's biggest source of revenue. But the economy has been struggling, and poverty levels are on the rise.
The poverty of those living around the source of Nigeria's wealth is bare to see.
So why can't Nigerians depend on their country's oil wealth? What happens to all that money? Oil companies like Shell blame these attacks for massive oil spills and fires. But human rights group Amnesty International says oil companies are also responsible for the spills and accuse them of misleading and neglecting local communities.
Ogun, President Shonekan and Obasanjo's home state, is the worst in the Southwest region. Plateau, the home of head of state General Yakubu Gowon, is the worst in the North Central region. Kano, the home state of General Sani Abacha, ranks worse than the national average poor states.
And we have to be very honest with ourselves. If you look at all the poverty indices in the world today, you'll find that in southwest Nigeria, the incidence of poverty is 20%. In the northwest, it is 80%. The Northeast, it's 80%.
Niger, the home state of heads of state General Babangida and Abubakar, ranks worst than the national average poor state. Katsina, Presidents Yar'Adua and Buhari's home state, ranks worse than the national average poor state. These states also have the worst poverty prevalence in their geopolitical regions. The people, their numbers inflated and juveniles inserted, are further schooled to vote for selected candidates, whether they're competent or not, and promised nepotistic benefits. But data shows that the people never benefit from these nepotistic promises, whether the leaders are military dictators or civilian autocrats. Though a few of the less privileged are financially empowered and strategically positioned to serve the sectional elite interest, the majority of the people are left high and dry. So let us be wise. Let me share with you a secret, probably the worst kept secret in the world, and yet we fall for it every single time. If a politician is interested in running for president and there is a level playing field for everyone, that politician would have to spend so much more time and money trying to appeal to everyone. And he may still have a hard time in doing so because he or she would have to reach out to people who are unfamiliar with who they are and also do not have a favorable bias towards them. So how do they sidestep all of this hard work? Well, when others who are not from the state or region of the politician seeking office are excluded from the race, it makes it both cheaper and easier for the politician to clinch the party ticket and position themselves as the one and only true candidate or the best choice available to the general voting public. Let me just put a caveat here. Inclusion and participation are major factors in Nigerian politics. This is not the issue in contention. The point is that smart-ass politicians often exploit this and make it the core focus of political conversation. They whip up sentiments among their ethnic groups using the myth that the whole group will benefit from the candidate's victory. The myth is backed by evidence when the candidate throws out a few names of people from their tribal groups who have been rewarded with employment and political appointments. But the problem is, all this is just tokenism. The percentage of people who receive these rewards, however many they may be, is minuscule, and in fact totally negligible when compared to those who end up facing poverty during the time that this same politician is in office. According to the evidence here, beyond bragging rights, states that produce presidents and heads of state do not have any true advantage over others that have not. In fact, they just may be worse off. It is just the president himself and his family, close circle of friends and associates in some level of proximity that benefit. The larger group is just as excluded as everyone else, even though the president never would have emerged without their participation. So do you agree with this analysis? Do you think that there is any true benefit to a state that produces a president? Leave your comments in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and ring the bell to be notified of new episodes of Nuts and Bolts.
Preview.